Good morning, everyone. As you can see, Mr. Dahl is on vacation, and it'll be up to me and my colleague to conduct business for the remainder of this week. And I think next week also. Okay, good. You people are extremely lucky. You only have to put up with me through a week. Mondays, we do the budget management review, and we start out this morning with noxious weeds.
Good morning. I will wait for Kathy to get settled. Good morning, Kathy Funk-Baxter, Finance Director. All right. We're going to start with noxious weed program. This is the financial. We start with the revenues. And hold on just a moment. Yes.
Well, that just eliminated my very first question.
Okay. You should have noxious weed program is your handout. We start with the revenue. They basically have intergovernmental revenue and miscellaneous. Their intergovernmental revenue will primarily be received in the latter part of the year after completion of their primary work their work season. This has to do with grants. And so most of that work completes in September. Their miscellaneous is their assessment. That's part of the annual billings that goes out on the tax billings. And they receive that revenue basically primarily in two installments, the April installment and the October installment. And so they're on track with their revenue versus the budget. So so far this year through July 29th, they've received $295,948 of their assessment revenue. It's up slightly over last year, and but on track with our target for the revenue. It's actually exceeding our target for the revenue year to date.
Any questions, Dennis? While he is thinking a little bit and examining that, maybe I could be a little bit of a curmudgeon here. Why is that called miscellaneous?
We categorize we put the revenues together in different groupings, and miscellaneous is just the one that categorizes that particular. It's according to the state bars code, and we're using those codes to categorize and group. So you'll have taxes, you'll have licenses grouped together, and miscellaneous just happens to capture the special, because it's a special assessment.
Right, would it be acceptable to really call the obvious out that it's a tax and just name that category a tax?
Well, I'm following the state bars categories
Right.
for classification.
Yeah, but that's just a name here in this case.
Yeah.
And the reason I would sort of harp on it a little bit is people do get surprised when they see that they're paying for something, and I think the noxious weed effort is actually a pretty reasonable effort, and I can't imagine anybody would object once they understand that what's going on. So it's not like they're buying a bridge to nowhere. They're actually helping. So
Yeah, I can override and if you'd like, but it also includes a couple of other miscellaneous items like their investment income in that line as well.
yeah, I would check with the chairman when he's back and see what his flavor is on that.
Okay,
Would that seem all right with you, Dennis?
Yeah, it is always one of those frustrating things that the terms in the bars code defies common sense from a layman's perspective. You have to be enmeshed in government bureaucraties to understand that. The term assessment, though, is kind of curious. It's different from a tax, although it's based on the value of property. But it's based on ownership of property. Let me put it that way. Okay. And it's called an assessment rather than a tax because it is supposed to be directly tied to a benefit that the property receives, as opposed to a property tax, which pays for all kinds of government programs that don't necessarily connect with, benefit to the property owner other than general government. It's like splitting hairs, though. I mean, it looks like a tax and it comes on the tax bill. It's a tax. Just it's not the same kind of tax as the general property tax. So
There's actually an interesting discussion there because for most people, particularly I would guess in Longview, what, are you gonna come and take out my crabgrass? And of course, you're not talking about those weeds, you're talking about noxious weeds, and they typically don't have it in the metro areas, although some spots do. What isn't handled is that the fact that I can have tansy in my yard can get tansy into your yard ever so easily. And so it's one of those very hard situations where what I do on my lot really does affect others. And so it's a global problem. And that's why I feel I could go with assessment or taxes.
So if I understand correctly, there are a couple of other assessments that are common on the tax bill, including the mosquito abatement program. That's a county government program that we assess property taxes to tackle the spread of mosquitoes. But the other one that's probably most common and most commonly understood are diking district assessments, because that's flood protection, and that makes more sense to call it an assessment rather than a property tax, because you're getting a direct benefit. Your property supposedly remains free from floodwaters. That's if it all works correctly. So
Perhaps.
three different kinds of assessments, but
Good point. Perhaps the crux is the diking districts means you pay if you're in the diking
Right.
district.
correct.
This is countywide.
Well, the noxious weed board is a district that just happens to include the entire county.
Yeah.
Right?
And
Crazy how we do
the
things.
mosquito board, we haven't learned how to train the mosquitoes how to just stay inside their own yard.
But that's another one where it's a county-wide district.
And is there any concern about the revenue balance with expenditures? This is probably a little more for Jennifer.
I don't know any concerns, no.
You probably need to identify yourself the first time.
Oh. Sorry, I'm Jennifer Mendoza, Noxious Weeds Coordinator.
Thank you.
And just in case there are people listening in that might not be familiar with the kinds of programs that you operate, give us just a brief overview of the different.
Oh, she'll be doing that in
activities.
a
I
moment.
do have that included in
Okay.
my presentation to follow the
Yeah.
budget conversation, so I'll hold off on that.
And I noticed that you're fully staffed
Currently, yes.
currently, so that's good. Not all of our departments are fully staffed for a whole host of different reasons.
So can we go to the expenditures slide? If there are any, so on the personnel expenses, our current year to date, we're at 163,766. That doesn't include, there's a second half of July payroll that still has to be posted. So when comparing it to our target and our prior year, we're a little bit behind, but that's because as of this week, we'll post the second half of July payroll. That will be posted. Supplies, we're on track with, pretty much on track with our target. Most of those supplies, they buy supplies and they will replenish those supplies as they get closer to the end of the year. And then their services, predominantly they're on track. We're at $84,000 versus a budget of $146,000. They're a little bit higher than last year, but that's because of internal service departments' billings were higher this year than last year. And they have 4 FTEs and they currently don't have any openings or vacancies right now.
Those are 4 FTEs, but that's not a head count of 4, right?
4 FTEs, and we also hire seasonals in the summer through employers overload, but that doesn't get reflected here.
Is that included in that number 4?
No.
No. Mm-mm. And their expenditures show up in the services line for the temporaries.
All
So
right.
does the board, does your board have a particular goal for your ending fund balance? I know we're trying to build up to anticipate any unforeseen needs.
We are trying to remain fairly steady as we are right now. I think we're kind of just even where we are. So
And the number you're shooting for?
off the top of my head, it's not coming to me. I think it's in my presentation here. Hold on.
It looks like it's, budgeted wise, it looks like it's about 30%
Of our assessment
of your budget.
of our budget. That
So
seems about
your
right.
budget's at 774,000. And the ending
I
fund
know.
is budgeted at 220,000.
Yes, I never think of our budget being as high as that number sounds, just the way all the numbers play. Usually our assessment is bringing in about 450,000 a year. And I think our target goal is maybe about half of that, a little bit more. Our board would like to stay above 200,000 with our ending fund.
And again, a little bit of history with that the public might not be aware of. With such a small department in terms of employees, and it's an outdoor job, the risk of accidents happening, causing disabilities, there's an expense that's involved that the department has to be prepared to cover. And I know we had one of those unfortunate accidents with under a previous administration, and it's very expensive. And I think we ended up having to share some of those costs over time before that all got settled. But so 30% may seem a lot for some people, but I think with the small department, if you can get away with doing that, it makes sense, I think, in the long run.
Right, and also with our cash flow, only receiving our assessment funds in the months of April and October.
Right.
We have larger grant expenditures that occur throughout the summer. And so I'll show later in our cash flow chart, but we have a pattern where we need to maintain a certain amount to be able to cover those grants before our reimbursement in the November to December timeframe. So that's another reason to keep our fund a little bit higher than the typical, I
It's
think
another
it's,
example when government grants are not free.
yeah.
You got to have money ahead of time.
You have to
because
have
you
it
get
ahead of time and then you get reimbursed. So All right, if there are no other budget questions, I did prepare a quick presentation. If Bailey could pull that up, I'd appreciate it. So I just want to review our program statistics. I didn't include everything I presented earlier this year. But I am going to quickly go over our program, talk about a few of those benefits you asked about, and measure some of the statistics that made sense to measure mid-year. So again, we're the Noxious Weeds Control Program. I'm Jennifer Mendoza, our program coordinator. Go ahead to the next slide. So our program is existing because of an RCW 1710, and the goal of that RCW is to reduce the economic loss and adverse effects that are caused by noxious weeds throughout our state. We are given specific duties within that law. And the primary one is to control the spread of noxious weeds throughout our county by working with landowners. Go ahead to the next slide.
A thing I might mention on this is that we've had many advisory boards, and recently we learned that the new Board of Health is different than other advisory boards. This board is different in itself. It has its own RCW, and there's a relationship that is always a bit confusing as to who's in charge of
Yes.
what. Like we have to approve the board member, but we don't appoint the board member, or how?
You do appoint the board member, but we have to do the posting for it and recruitment. We take the applications, and then our board makes a recommendation to the commissioners. The
And
commissioners make the formal appointment.
And the candidates have to have a certain number of support.
They have to have at least 10 signatures from citizens in their area. And there's a map here on the screen roughly designating those areas.
So by way of history, the reason the county adopted this board was prior to that, noxious weed programs were supported by the general fund, which meant your program competed with other general fund programs like Parks and Rec. And then the state allowed this separate assessment to be a source of revenue, provided we adopt a board like you're going to describe to us. And so
Correct.
that helped free up general fund dollars for other programs.
Yes. A couple other differences. So this board is supervisory and regulatory. They can adopt rules and regulations within our county for noxious weed control. And they also directly oversee our program, set the direction. We come to the commissioners for approval of our budget and final setting of the assessment rates. If there's any discrepancies, it goes back to the weed board for a new proposal, and there can be some discussions that happen there. So our board is very different than most of the other supervisory boards or advisory boards in the county. Again, here are the 5 areas that we have designated. Again, our goal is to protect Cowlitz County from the impacts of noxious weeds by working with all landowners, including government agencies and private landowners alike. We do have 5 citizen board members who serve throughout our county at a volunteer capacity. 3 of those board members must be involved in the primary production of agriculture, which is sometimes challenging to find depending on the area. I will note we do have 2 positions in which their term will be expiring this winter, and that'll be Area 1, which is currently represented by John Gross, and then Area 4, which is currently represented by Betty Engelman. We can reappoint them if nobody else is interested, if they still want to serve, but those positions do get renewed every 4 years. So next slide.
Question?
Yeah.
What causes an area to be identified as an area?
That is currently, I believe, set by the commissioners with district boundaries. I think we tried to somewhat evenly represent the county with one of the cities being in each of those areas. I know that the last time they redrew the boundaries was, I think, 2018. So that was before my time here. But it is an area set by the commissioners.
I need help from our historian here.
Well, if you look at the map, you'll notice that the lines are interesting, and
Mhm.
there's no requirement apparently under state law that the districts are equal in population.
Mm,
So it's basically of convenience for obtaining board members. At one time, we had adopted one that did reflect population, which meant that there was an awful lot of board representation from Longview and Kelso, which they just don't have an abundance of farming, you know, either tree farming or food farming. So that was really difficult for them to come up with the members. So they went back to just a geography based. And yeah, so we kind of went backwards
Mhm.
from one person, one vote. But
Mhm.
again, it's the service is based on serving agriculture.
Yeah. All right, next slide, Bailey.
I don't know if that helped.
That, I
Um,
saw the lines as you mentioned, they're kind of interesting.
So there is a legal definition for a noxious weed. It has to be non-native, so a plant that is considered to be native from here, such as horsetail, will never be a noxious weed. They're often difficult to control, but also have been found by the state to be highly destructive, competitive, or difficult to control, threatening agriculture and natural resources. We currently have 161 species on the list, and if you go to the next slide, that list is broken down into 3 classifications, class A, B, and C. A is our highest priority. Those species are required for eradication. We're currently working with 9 of those species here in our county. Then we have about 70 class B species. The goal with B species is to contain and prevent the spread. That's very likely we will not be able to eradicate class B or C species anytime soon because seeds have such a long viability. But the goal is to reduce the impacts by preventing seed production. So we have about 46 of our class B weeds that we're battling throughout our county. And of the 52 class C weeds, we do have about 32 of those present. A lot of the class C weeds we educate on rather than request control of. There are a few priorities where we do communicate with landowners about class C weeds.
So Jennifer, Scotch broom is a popular complaint, I think.
It is, it's a class B.
And it's class B, so it's not, doesn't kill anybody.
It doesn't
It's
kill
just
anybody.
everywhere.
It's widespread. The seeds are viable for upwards 60 to 80 years. So it's going to be in our landscape for a while. When I communicate with landowners about that, I just remind them of the longevity and that if we do nothing, it's only going to get worse. So sometimes with landowners who have Scotch broom in significant amounts of it, we are trying to focus on priority areas rather than complete control and slowly work maybe the border of their property or the isolated infestation so that it doesn't get worse. We also have, and I have a picture of this later, but biocontrols available that have been released to reduce the seed production. So there are many different ways to approach the situation, but if a landowner does nothing, the situation will only get worse. So it's on them. So if you want to go to the next slide.
Wait,
Yes, go ahead.
if I look at that, I would assume that 80% of your effort is on class A and maybe 15% on B and 5% on C.
It depends on the effort definition.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to figure out how you prioritize. You mentioned something there that was a bit on the tantalizing side. It sounded like you had hope, maybe expectations probably too optimistic. You hope you can eliminate all class A in the county?
That is the expectation throughout the state, is that class A weeds are eradicated fully.
Okay, so that tells me, I mean, that should consume everybody's effort all the time, right? So it doesn't leave anything for B or C.
It does consume a lot of our time. The difference is the time frame of which we're dealing with them. So through the month of April and May, we do spend a very large amount of our time on the class A species. By the time we're in July, we're looking at our B species priority. So all of July is spent around tansy and thistles. Our false brome, we're usually dealing with it throughout May and June. Some of our other Class A thistles, we're dealing with April through early June, but it's all about timing. Once those plants have completed their life cycle for the year, we can move on to the next. So it's nice that they distribute themselves among the year that way.
So most of your grants come from State of Washington, Department of Agriculture,
Yes, I do have a
And-
slide on grants.
and the Forest Service. too,
Forest
right?
Service and the State Department of Agriculture is our primary funding sources for grants. We do have a couple other state agencies that we're partnering with as well.
Will you tell us how we're doing on the eradication in A and some metric that you pick?
I can get back to you with that information.
Okay.
I will talk about a couple of the A species here in a moment, so I'll try to highlight that when I talk about them. Okay, next slide. So the noxious weed law does designate the duty of control to the landowner. So while our program does have expertise to identify resources to help control, guidance that we can provide to the landowner, ultimately it is the landowner's responsibility and not our programs. And that does still include government agencies as being a responsible party. Go ahead to the next slide.
Will you talk to us a little bit on how you do that in the previous slide?
Yes, so with landowners, private landowners, we send out request to control letters when we find something on their land. That could be for any of the A, B, or C species that are a priority for control. Typically, we give them an informal 2 weeks to control the species and or contact our program with their control plan. We do understand it can take more than 2 weeks to control things. It is a very long process, but we want to be in contact with them is the primary goal of the first letter. If we don't have anything back, we try calling them, we may door knock, we may find other ways to try to contact them. And if it is a high priority and control still hasn't occurred, we can use the steps outlined in the weed law, which allows us to send a notice of violation. And at that point, they have a specific time frame to get rid of the weeds, or we can take further action. So those further actions might be either a simple civil infraction, which doesn't actually get the weeds controlled, or we can cause the weeds to be controlled at the owner's expense. So if it is such a high priority that those weeds are controlled, and that's situational depending on the location, the species, the class of the weed, the density of the weed, there are many factors that go into those decisions. But that is what the weed law states we can do.
I think you make a lot of decisions on common sense based on the situation and the time of year and maybe other factors there. So any landowner that has issues should talk to you about their circumstance.
Absolutely.
You're a team with the landowner. You're not there. You don't go snooping in at midnight to see what they have in the garage there that they're hiding on you, anything like that. In fact, you're not allowed on the property.
There is some language to interpret in the RCW that gives us access to properties to look for weeds. We typically survey from a public road or a high volume road, but primarily if we needed to walk on the property or see something further, we would want to contact the landowner first. So that has happened. You know, we've had some sort of indication that a species might be present. So we either found their phone number or called them or sent them a letter that just requests an inspection. Hey, we have a suspicion that this is here. Can we come check it out? There are also laws that state that we can get a warrant if that landowner declines our request. And then furthermore, it is some sort of violation to prevent us from doing this job.
Got it.
I don't want to quote the violation because I can't remember it off the top of my head. I don't typically have to go there. So. All right. So if we go to the next slide, I just again wanted to highlight we have 5 citizen volunteers, myself, 2 noxious weed inspectors, our administrative assistant, and then we have a summer field crew typically 3 to 4 members who carry out the majority of our grant work. Going on to the next slide, real quickly, we do provide many benefits to the community through the prevention of the spread of noxious weeds. We're reducing our impacts to agriculture, decreasing toxic plants in our environment, plants that are both toxic to livestock and humans. Also, some of our species, by controlling them, we can lessen the risk of wildfire. We can improve habitat for many of our species, both elk, deer, fish, pollinators, all kinds of things that depend on plants for forage or habitat. And then we're also protecting some other recreational opportunities, the integrity of roads, plant diversity, and things like that by educating landowners and encouraging them to control their noxious weeds. So that's just a brief benefit to the community at large. If you want to move forward, I'll talk about the ways that we're measuring our program, both through education and outreach, inspection, our grant projects, and then our weed board also looks at our financial stability on a monthly basis. So I'll dive right into that really quickly. Next slide. So one of our measures, we do a lot of education and outreach. I do many Master Gardener presentations throughout the year. Other groups also request presentations on noxious weed control, and I do a lot of that in addition to attending some of our community events. So this year we've attended 16 different outreach activities with an estimated at least 1,300 contacts, and that's through this point this year. Just to note, last year we were at about 800 contacts through these presentations at the end of the year. So we're already exceeding that target. While we won't be able to reach everybody, I think the goal for education and outreach is always to provide as much outreach as we can. So the higher that number, the better. I don't think it will ever be our entire population though. So, okay, go ahead and move on to the next slide. So this one talks about our written communications sent annually. You can see the past 4 years of data complete through the end of the year, and then 2024 is only through July. Our primary communication that we send is our request to control letters. We do want that to be our biggest number. We've started to notice an increase in our postcard reminders because they seem to be effective. So somebody who had one of our priority species last year and we send a reminder postcard, we may not need to send them a request to control letter. We send those postcards at a better time for control as well. So they get a little bit more time to address an issue that they should already know about. Our notice of violation number there is at the top. So far this year, we've sent 2 notice of violation letters. That is a really good number to have because we want to focus on education. You can see back in 2020, we sent up to 19 notice violation letters. So I'd like to reduce that over time, but I don't expect it to be 0 at any point in time, just because people don't always control their weeds. So we do need to be able to use the weed law when needed. Next slide. So this is our data collection throughout the year. The gray line is the current year. As you can see, it drops down to 0 in August because we don't have data going forward. Can't predict the future. But we are right in line with our trend for data collection for the year. So I don't see anything alarming here. Up to now, we've collected just over 2,000 points for noxious weed data. So that's what I would expect to see. Next slide.
On that
Oh, yes.
slide, what is the metric? Could you try and explain that again?
Yes, so our noxious weed points are typically collected 1 point per property that has a specific weed.
Okay.
In the right of way, we also collect points that are outside of property lines if there's a distinct population. And the parts that skews the data a little bit is our grant data collection. When we are out working on something like false brome or Japanese knotweed, we do tend to take more than 1 point per property. And that is so that when we follow up the years following, we can ensure that we found each of the infestations that existed on a parcel. So overall, it's the number of populations that we're finding. All right, next. Okay, so through our inspection, this always keeps us on our toes. We did find 3 different new species that had not been documented in our county this year. These are all Class B species, so mid-priority for us. Hanging sedge, we found 5 separate populations of this, and through what we call early detection and rapid response, we were able to get a hold of the landowner, get those species treated immediately, and prevent the spread of those species throughout our county. Our inspectors and I all had a chance to look at this plant, see it in person, get to know it well so that we can identify it in a future setting. And the success on that one is that we haven't found it anywhere else, and we prevented it from spreading this year. So ideally, if we stay on top of that in those neighborhoods, we can prevent the spread and establishment in our county. Hanging sedge and myrtle spurge, which is the second species that we found, are both known to be ornamental type species. So we consider those garden escapees. Somebody brought it in, planted it in their landscape. While it may behave in their landscape, if it spreads elsewhere through the many ways that seeds spread, it can become very invasive in a natural environment. So we want to try to prevent the spread of these ornamental type species. Myrtle spurge is another one that we found 2 infestations of. Our quick communication with the landowner. Both infestations were very small. The landowners each chose to control those themselves. This one is a very high priority because the sap is very toxic to skin. If you get it in your eyes, it can blind you. And it's overall a very aggressive plant in the landscape. So that one we were also able to prevent the spread through early detection. Wild basil, that was another new species to us. I don't have such great news on this one though. It was added to the noxious weed list about 2 years ago. So prior to 2 years ago, we hadn't been looking for it. We found it this year, and we are finding a lot of it. It's in many of our natural areas, especially out in the Ariel neighborhood. We've got it at some of the campgrounds and other areas. So this is one we are currently trying to finish determining the extent of, and it seems to be in multiple neighborhoods throughout our county. So once we have a better picture of the data, we will be able to figure out how we're going to address that.
So if I go to my local nursery, can I assume that anything they have that I can buy is not on your A, B, or C list?
Not a safe assumption. You can almost assume that our Class A species should not be on there. There's another plant list called the prohibited plant list, and this is monitored by the WSDA. It's the list that nurseries are not supposed to be able to sell the species. Unfortunately, not all of the B and C species get put on that list. The other intricacy is we live so close to Oregon, you can go to Oregon and buy a whole different series of plants. So it's not a guarantee. I would like to say that it is, but it's not.
So that brings up an interesting issue, which is any boundary, like the jurisdictional boundary, it's always artificial, but is there a purpose? I mean, your purpose is to eliminate the damage as much as possible that invasive species can do. Doesn't Oregon have the same problem, and why aren't our lists the same?
Oregon does have similar issues. They just have a different way of monitoring that. So they have a lot of our species are the same, but there are a few that don't align. So I'm not sure how better to collaborate on those issues.
Those have to be, they can't be in Class A, right?
There is a Class A you can buy in Oregon, unfortunately.
I'm
I know.
befuddled.
I know. So it adds to the challenge.
So doesn't that weaken your case in terms of your purpose? It's either a noxious weed or it's not.
It's a noxious weed in our state. It's a state law. It is a territory that we are trying to keep those species out of because we know we have the data that says this is a bad plant for these X number of reasons. And while you can have it there, you can't have it here. So
Can you, here's the problem I'm struggling with. anytime the public supports a program, I'd like to see a hard, fast, non-political reason for
Mhm.
that. And here I'm smelling a political reason, and that alloys everybody.
Mhm.
Okay.
I don't have an answer. All right, we'll move on to the next slide. I want to try to breeze through this so that, sorry, other programs have time. So we also have 3 different species that are high priority for us. These are all Class A's that we are finding new sites on. Egg leaf spurge is one of those. That's the first picture there. We did find a total of 5 new sites of these. Thankfully, each of them were relatively small sites and in ornamental landscape settings. And so those landowners have been very quick to respond to those species being present, as well as 4 new milk thistle sites. And that one I cannot explain. We're finding it in very random areas. So while that is very easy to identify, you can see the pictures there. There's both the flower head for milk thistle, and then the leaf pattern you can see has very white milky venations. They're very distinct plants, just don't know how they're spreading in our landscape. So we're currently chasing those throughout our county. But the biggest problem that we're encountering is false brome. And if you could go to the next slide.
This, when you say high priority detections, you're not implying that those are Class A.
Those are Class A's, yes.
Those 3 were Class A,
Mhm.
or are Class A. Okay.
And that's why they are of our highest priority. So it's good that we're having really good response with some of the ornamental ones, but false brome seems to be a bigger issue. We're finding this we had some grant funding on this for the past year or 2 from different agencies, and we've been focusing on working with landowners to control this. However, this year, after our grant funding has been used up, we have identified additional new infestations in completely separate neighborhoods. A lot of it's roadside, so we've been working very closely with Public Works to get the roadside treatments eradicated. And some of it's in state land, so now we're also working with the DNR to ensure that they can treat the false brome in that area. I don't think we'll have time to look at this today, but I do have a story map available online where you can explore the current location of all of the false brome that we know about in our county, and how to handle this. There's advice on treatment, there's advice on why it's bad. So if you get a chance to explore that story map, I would encourage you to take some time.
Do you have any theories on the spread of these different problems?
Yeah, so for false brome, when it was initially brought to our attention, actually Oregon was battling it so hard. And we've also, found it in Washington, but Oregon was having it spread through logging equipment is what they determined. And so I don't know if that's how it's also spreading here or how it was introduced here. But where we are finding it, we're also seeing it distributed along deer trails. So I think deer trails. Or deer or other animal trails that we're finding in the forest that we're working in. So once it establishes in a forest, it can take over the understory, which is what we're seeing here in this photo. It's primarily false brome. There's a couple other species there, but I think the deer are moving it through the landscape or maybe other animals. And then from there, it does its thing and it spreads. So machinery and animals is the probable methods of spread for this one. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we do offer a variety of assistance programs for citizens in our county that have any of our noxious weeds. One of our more recent things that we did, and we've been doing this for a couple of years, is our Tansy Collection Day. We did collect a total of 1.2 tons this year from 16 landowners at our Tansy Collection Day, which was held July 13th. It was maybe a little bit early for tansy season, although we would love for landowners to get to it earlier than later. We have had a large number of calls and other complaints about tansy since that event. And we also have disposal vouchers and bags that we're able to provide to landowners. I will say I've seen some things on social media lately where people are noting you can get bags from us and then the dump takes it for free. I will note you need to pair it with the voucher from our program. So if you get bags and you want us to pay for the disposal, you also need the voucher. So that's one of the programs that we have. If you want to go to the next slide. We also have a biocontrol release program. So things like Scotch broom or meadow knapweed that are widely distributed throughout our landscape. There are bugs that help to reduce the population over time. It's important to note that the bugs will never fully eradicate the species. Tansy has a cinnabar moth that is widely found in the landscape. We don't release that anymore, but we do support when it's there. With Scotch broom, we've got a bug that feeds on the seeds and reduces the seed production of the plant. Same thing with the knapweeds. So these bugs help to passively control the species. They're the natural predators in the species' native environment. So when the plants were brought here, their natural predators were not. They've also been studied for impacts on other native vegetation. And these bugs have been approved by APHIS, which is a national agency, to be released. We're also working with an insect that targets knotweed as well. So it's still pretty early in the phases on that one, but we do have a couple of sites for knotweed. So this is one of the more passive things that we do to help with landowners controlling species throughout the landscape. If you want to go to the next slide, I'll talk about the remainder of our programs. So in addition to our disposal and our biocontrol programs, we also have a cost share program that allows us to reimburse landowners for noxious weed control expenses, primarily herbicide. That requires a pre and post inspection just to validate that they are treating the weeds that they say they're treating, and that we're all on the same page about a control plan. So we do have that available for landowners who are tax exempt due to senior citizen or disabled citizen status within the county. We can help to control their noxious weeds. Our program does go out and do some control work for those. We also offer weed-free certification on hay and gravel. And then we have an equipment lending program. So if somebody needed a backpack sprayer for their weeds, maybe a weed wrench for their Scotch broom, or an injection gun for their knotweed, we have those tools available for the landowners to use. So this year, when you add our grant program into that, we've helped already more landowners than we helped last year. And I expect this number to grow significantly because we haven't started our knotweed project this year yet, which should add a significant number to our grant landowners assisted. So aside from telling people they have noxious weeds, those who come to us and have asked for assistance, we've provided almost 180 folks assistance with one of these programs this year. So, all right, next slide. I kind of talked about this already. So again, here is just our list of programs. And this is not including grants. We've helped about 39 landowners through those programs. So I'll skip this one since I just described most of those. So with our grants, we have 4 primary project areas. We have our Class A projects. We've had funding from both the State Weed Board and the WSDA to help with our Class A thistles, our egg leaf spurge, false brome. Over the past year, we've helped 121 landowners this year across 130 acres. We do have another State Weed Board grant coming for the next year. They're on a July through June fiscal year. So that funding just will be awarded to us here shortly. But we have about $5 grand to help with those Class A species coming forward. We also have our Mount St. Helens project. We partner with the Forest Service and also the Department of Transportation to treat weeds there. We also have funding from the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation to help with treatments within the monument. So that's been a longstanding project. We do a lot of surveying as well as weed control throughout the monument, focusing on trailheads and the trails, and then any wildlife grazing areas that we can identify. There is a lot of room for improvement there, and especially with the bridge closure up there, we're pretty limited on our access to some of our weed infestations. So I see more to come there. And then for knotweed, we also have been working on that for a number of years. We have primarily funding from the State Department of Agriculture, but we're also partnering with Fish and Wildlife as well as the Cowlitz Tribe to do smaller projects in other areas. And then we have an agreement with Columbia Land Trust for some noxious weed control within a conservation easement on Abernathy Creek. So that's just a small project for us. If you go to the next slide, this is our grant breakdown. This calls out each grant, how much is left, what the time frame is. I would note that we've already expended all of our existing Class A funding with about $5 grand to come. And then our remaining funds, we have $140,000 designated to us. The time frame is pretty variable within that funding. Some of our Forest Service grants are much longer in term than some of our knotweed or Class A grants. So this just breaks it down by grant if you're interested. Okay, next slide. So when we look at our summary of contacts throughout all of the things that we're doing, we have our education and outreach, our written communications, helping people through our assistance programs and grants. We estimate that so far this year, we've had just over 3,000 interactions. I like to look at this as percentage of our households throughout the county. So when we looked at this at the end of 2023, we had about 7%, and we're up to 7.4% of households at this point in the year. So I know I don't usually like to look at decimals, but that was the growth in the last 7 months. So I did include that this time around. Go ahead and next slide. So this is the financial summary report that our weed board reviews on a monthly basis. A couple of the metrics that we like to look at. The first pie chart that you can see on the left-hand side is the amount of assessment funding that we've received for the year. So through the end of June, this page is through the end of June, we have received just over half of our assessment funding. You can see our cash flow chart at the bottom. That's the line graph, and that is the pattern that our weed program sees in expenditures and incomes throughout the year. And it's broken down. You can see our cash balance, which is the dark green, our investments, which is the bright green, and then the very top is our assigned vehicle fund, which we try to grow each year until we need to replace a vehicle. So this is the average pattern that we expect to see with our cash flow. The other thing I would note is on the bottom right, we have two pie graphs. This is percent of our budget that's been expended. We've, through June, expended 42% of our budget. And then the second pie graph there is a breakdown of where those were expended. So labor is our highest expenditure. Interfund services is about a quarter of what we've expended. And then we have just other services and supplies, which are a pretty small portion of our budget. So we do review this with the weed board on a monthly basis, but here's kind of a mid-year update. And then the next slide is just a review of, when it comes up, it's our current assessment rates. We are not currently planning on asking for an increase for next year. So we will remain steady at $8 per parcel and 30 cents per acre. And then forest parcels are 80 cents per parcel and 3 cents per acre. The noxious weed law does designate that forest parcels must be 10% of a standard parcel. So that's the differentiation there. And if you want to go on to the next slide, just reminding everybody through some fun pictures to stop the weeds and catch the seeds. And you can go to the next slide. Any questions?
I actually have a whole bunch of requests or questions. We've used up a lot of time. We don't get to speak to you too often or hear from you every quarter.
I think I'm here every 6 months for
6
this
months, yeah.
presentation.
So and by the way, I think this was an excellent job. Presentation was just top notch.
Thank you.
We need one thing. You've got two people in the audience that maybe you'd like to introduce because the board members are pretty important and you've got your staff.
Yes. I would like to introduce our board chair, John Gross, and our administrative assistant, Beth Tanner.
Normally I'd have you come up so we could get a picture of you and all that, but.
Oh, we don't need a picture.
We're a little shy on time. Lots of questions. You've answered most of them along the way, which is excellent. Glyphosates, do you use them and what do you have to say on that?
We do use glyphosate as one of our products. If this is in relation to the Roundup controversy, I have attended several presentations, and I highly recommend anyone interested in looking into this looks up a presentation by Dr. Alan Felsot from WSU. He essentially has done a significant amount of research, which if you read into it, breaks down the impacts and why that was an issue. Part of the issue was the health impacts that are being experienced were not based on the glyphosate product itself, but rather some of the additional additives to the product that used to be used. And then secondarily, the way that they're testing it is out of proportion in comparison to how they would test a standard herbicide. So I don't have a lot of belief in the issue as glyphosate specifically as an ingredient being the problem. So we do use that, and in some cases, it is one of the best tools when it's used appropriately and with proper PPE to accomplish the job that we need to do most efficiently.
So if I go to Home Depot, I shouldn't hesitate to buy the proper and follow the proper instructions.
Absolutely, you should follow the proper instructions. I will also caution that Roundup as a brand, please use that as a brand name now, because what you should be looking at is the active ingredients. And Roundup has many products with different active ingredients that do not contain glyphosate. So not trying to advertise for the product itself, but I think that there is a lot of misinformation out there, which is why I'm using that brand name as an example. But what we recommend that people use is looking at the label for the active ingredient that is known to be effective on the species that we're targeting.
Okay, thank you. Then I've just got one last question. When I take a look at a weed or a plant, I don't know whether it's a weed or not, is there an app that you recommend that I can put on my phone, take a picture or expose it and have it say, oh, what you've got here is blah, de blah?
Yeah, there are many apps that do that. I would hesitate to recommend one because there are pros and cons to the ones I've tried. But I will also mention that either our program or the Master Gardeners, and especially the Master Gardeners, they have a plant and insect ID clinic that you can take it to them and they can help you to identify it. We do also do a little bit of identification within our program, but at some point, if we know it's not a noxious weed, we may send them to the Master Gardeners anyhow. So I would say that that is our greatest community resource for plant ID.
Okay, so if I do a search on the web, I'll find some apps and choose one and.
Yeah,
if I
and some
like it,
of the
use it.
phones I've noticed, IT just had to switch to iPhones, and even just the camera has a function where it'll search for the plant identification. I would say proceed with caution. While it may give you several results, it may not always give you the right results. So it's good to have verification from an expert.
That's the reason I asked. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I just simply want to compliment you and the board, John. I hope you'll pass the message on. This is a government program that has the potential to be a heavy hand. But I know the board and staff does a great job of reaching out and talking and working alongside your partners rather than policemen. And I think that's very appropriate. It may end up being less efficient, but I think it is exactly the way property owners want the government to act, to be partners rather than a heavy hand. So I appreciate the work. And the five of you meet monthly on a pretty regular basis. and you hardly ever get any good feedback. You deal with complaints. I appreciate the work that you guys do, so please, please pass that message on to your board.
Thank you.
And thank you also. So next we have risk management. I think we'll just go ahead and run through, even though we're a little late, maybe risk, since we see you much more frequently, we can do that one quickly.
Okay, do you want me to go through the financials, or do you want risk management to do their presentation first, or?
I would like risk management to do the presentation first, and then I will actually digest this offline if that's
That's
acceptable.
okay.
Okay. Shelley Pierce, Risk Manager.
Scott Kaling, risk analyst.
And Bailey, if you want to go ahead and pull up our presentation, I already passed it out to the board.
Is your microphone on? It looks like it is,
I
but
believe so. Can you hear me?
now better.
Okay,
There you go.
better.
I do have my hearing aids in.
I'll reintroduce myself for you. Shelley Pierce, Risk Manager. Next slide. So this just goes over our workers' compensation. For July, we had a total of 14 claims. For 2024, total of 20. We closed 5 claims in July. Any questions? Nope. For our 7-year average, next slide. We're at an average of 20 claims. 15 is our average, sorry, for 7 years. So we're a little bit above the average, but we're looking good for 2024. Next slide. Workers' compensation. Scott, you want to talk on this for the numbers?
Yeah, this is workers' compensations for the total incurred for each of our open current claims, as well as how much we owe in outstanding and how much we've paid. As you can see, the 2015, we had 1 claim that's still currently open that we are nearing the end to, unless if something changes. We have 1 in 2020, and then 2023, we have 4 that are currently open. And then, I'm sorry, 2023, we have 4 currently open, and then 2024, we have 8.
On this, we're self-insured in this, aren't we?
This is the workers' compensation, yes.
Right, and so good number, and it may be here, for me, every day is a new day. The amount of assets that we have against the draw on these assets or the account, that's what I'm really interested in. How are we doing?
So we have currently a handful of open claims that are as a total over the county, about 600 employees. I don't have the number on top of my head, but it's rather small when you look at that, when you look at that aspect. So it's not a substantial amount when you look into number of claims by how many employees are actively working. However, there is some substantial costs associated with these injuries.
When, as self-insured, I assume I can go to some places and find a little ledger entry, an account that says I've got this much that is the pool of money I've accumulated to pay out in the future.
This is Kathy Funk Baxter, Finance Director. So we bill all of our departments on an annual basis, an assessment. And so we bring in a little over $500,000 this year in those assessments, and that money's available to pay out our claims. And so far this year, we have expenditures against that 515,000 of 359,000 so far this year. And we have a fund balance of about $150,000 currently.
Are you happy with that? Is that comfortable? It seems like we're on a pace to exceed our balance.
Yeah, so we're currently monitoring it. And so one of our larger expenses is our workman's comp excess insurance policy, which we haven't had to utilize yet. So that's there as a risk mitigation effort.
Is
And-
that on an incident or aggregate basis or both?
It's both. And so on that one, that was like 117,000 of the 359 that's already been paid. I think we're on track to be within our budget. And so that's basically, when you look at this chart, you're seeing that our actual expenditures for actual claims has been in the range of 180,000 per year, something like that. So we're a little higher this year than we've been. Like we said, we're higher than the average, but I think we'll be within our annual assessment. And we'll be evaluating this assessment for 2025 here in the next month.
Okay, next slide. And this just reviews all of our workers' compensation by department.
So Shelley, I am curious, I can kind of understand the different departments and the nature of the jobs that might make them a little bit more risky. Although overall, we don't have that many claims. Superior Court though, what kind of accidents occur in Superior Court? That seems odd
Yeah,
to me.
do you want to take that, Scott?
Yeah, we had a few injuries at Superior Court in regards to regarding some claims about exposure to the building environment.
Exposure to what?
The building.
The building
Oh,
environment.
yeah. Okay.
So these claims are directly correlated with the HOJ air quality.
Right, this last month, we've received the
Correct.
reports on the work that's been done to investigate, to try to remediate the concerns.
So this is like, I'm not going to go to work today because I feel sick from yesterday.
Mhm. Yeah, these claims are, those specific claims are
Headaches, tightness of chest, things like that.
yeah.
They don't want those days counted against their sick leave because it's building costs, it's employer cost. I mean, that's what the request is, right?
Well,
It's different.
they're entitled to file a workers' comp claim. Workers' comp typically does not cover these types of claims unless if there is evidence to show that there was an actual exposure. Through the investigations that we've had, there's no signs of that. So that's basically the summary of that.
Did that
Thank you.
answer your question, Commissioner?
Yep, yep, thank you.
Next slide. Liability claims. So as of the beginning of July, there were 7, and then tort claims, we had 8. We were able to close 5 claims in July. Worked very hard on closing all of those. And then to wrap up training, we're rolling out more Narcan training in our Hall of Justice building. And then we are looking at moving forward with proposing that active shooter training is part of our required training for all of Cowlitz County employees. So that's all we have. Any questions or follow-up?
I'm just chuckling a little bit because one of the tort claims I saw was from someone from Seattle.
Yes.
How are you handling that one?
I just got a,
You can say.
yes. So someone ran over a tire part going down I-5, going through Cowlitz County. And so they filed a tort claim. So our adjuster is addressing that this morning. And so they hit a tire part going down I-5 through Cowlitz County. Their car was damaged. They had to be towed from Cowlitz County all the way to the Seattle area. And their car was
Right.
damaged as well.
We're not going to pay on that, are we?
It hasn't been decided yet, but to my knowledge, it's not a claim that the county would be responsible for. You as a driver need to be looking out on the highway for tire parts, car parts. It's kind of a driver's responsibility.
Yeah. Okay, thank
So
you.
I had to smile when I saw the second bullet titled active shooter training, and I'm thinking, we want all county employees to be active shooters?
We
No,
want the
no.
training.
Active shooter response training. right?
Response training, yeah. Just
okay.
in the day in the world that we live in now,
Mhm.
I think it's a great training to have just to know how to respond in those types of situations.
So can you back that up with some history? I mean, been talking to people in general, we can train and train, but when an active shooter walks in the door, the world is totally different than it was in the scenario in the room. So if we're going to spend time and effort here to do active shooter training, what assurance do we have that we get statistically some value out of it?
I don't know that there's any statistic out there that can tell you the value in it, but I can tell you my real life situation. I've completed active shooter training. I've provided active shooter training. I was in Long Beach with my family. Gentleman walked in who was mentally unwell, waved a gun in one of the novelty stores, and I knew instantly what to do with my children. So I can tell you firsthand knowledge that I knew what to do in that type of situation because I had gone through the training and received the training. I felt better. I felt more equipped to handle that type of situation. I instantly knew to fight or flight. And so from that type of experience, I can tell you, I felt like I could protect my family a little bit better. So by providing this training to county employees, I feel like they'll know how to handle a situation should our citizens face that situation. So I don't know that there's enough statistics out there yet. I'm sure we could Google it and find some number on the web, but to me, it will provide a little bit more reassurance to our county employees to have that training and be able to know how to handle a situation.
Is that listed in the mandatory training?
Not as of yet. It's something that we're proposing. So we're working with HR so that our staff members can have that training. I know that some, but not all have had it about 2 years ago, 18 months ago, something like that. So it's done by building. So I know the Hall of Justice had it about 18 months ago, but staff have asked for it again.
Yeah, I've got certain allergy to mandates. If you're going to mandate this, I request that it goes through the board for
Oh,
approval of
absolutely.
anything like that.
Yes, that's why we're bringing it up here today. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's it.
Dennis, if you need paper clips, I've got a whole bunch here. So we're now into the agenda item review session, and this should take about 2 hours. I just have to pick the planet in which those 2 hours would be. Which one has the fastest rotation, not or?
I don't remember.
Yeah, I
I'm
don't
sure I
either.
knew at some point, but I've forgotten.
But I'm glad you understood what I was
Yes.
saying, yeah.
Okay, so we have one item on the agenda tomorrow. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. Susan Eugenius, County Engineer. Tomorrow's agenda on the consent agenda is a call for public hearing to designate a portion of Willow Grove Road as a no parking zone. The public hearing will be scheduled for August 27th at 9:30. This issue was brought to us by the Port of Longview with they saying fishermen are getting out there prior to the opening of the park and they're parking along the roadway and causing an issue. So they've requested that we have a hearing to designate the area directly in front of the port on Willow Grove, no parking zone.
At that time, you have a map and you'll show people where everything is.
Yes, we will have a map. Once the call goes out, we will also post it out in the field, sign showing the hearing date and time and the location that we're looking at.
And I assume what you're planning to do meets with your common sense as opposed to, I've got to do this because I'm asked to do it.
Is there really a problem, Morris?
Thank you.
That depends on who you speak to.
Yeah, yeah.
I have not received complaints from citizens. I've just received this from the port.
Okay, so, and
Okay.
photographs and other evidence doesn't exist yet?
I have not seen any photographs of the parking in the morning, no. And it's at daybreak and it is not a time that I have managed to be out there. Daybreak is a little early for me to be up and out to catch the fishermen.
So the port will be expected to come with the evidence that they have, because they
Yes.
probably do have the,
Yes, that was the request of them.
that's reasonable.
Thank you. Appreciate the follow-up. Yeah. Is that it?
That's the only item we have on the agenda. If we have any miscellaneous, we can talk about those.
So road closure on Green Mountain Road. Is the county involved in that at all? Is somebody else closing it?
There's no closure on Green Mountain Road that I'm aware of besides of trucks.
I think
We,
that's what you mean, the
yes,
locals only.
Because
thing.
of the construction on the freeway.
right. The only thing we can turn around are the tractor trailers because it's a public
the
road.
Public notice said local access only is what the signs are gonna come up with. I was kind of assuming you'd give us an update on what's happening down
Yeah, I
there.
believe Mike Moss, Public Works Director. DOT put a few signs up on the freeway saying local access only. We did put a sign up and it painted some lines in front of the fire station to make sure that people weren't impeding traffic from the fire department or to get out for calls. There are some local access only signs in the area. I don't believe the sheriff's office is enforcing that side of it. They're enforcing the tractor trailer staying on the freeway going south. I believe there's also signs stating reader boards from DOT stating in a sense, not a quicker, this access point's not quicker, stay on I-5, trying to make sure people stay on I-5. I know they reached out to Google Maps and what's the other route? Waze to make recommendations for people not to have that as as a backup or an alternate route, and those were denied.
Too bad there's not a way you can control the red marks on the Google apps, right? For that kind of a route. 'Cause
Correct.
That's a real headache.
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of calls. I was on a conference call last Thursday with DOT, the sheriff's office, sheriff's state patrol. a lot of calls going into the sheriff's office, but mainly DOT about people parking on, or pretty much a parking lot on Green Mountain Road in the, 3, 4, 5, 6 o'clock hour each day. People using their yards as restrooms, knocking on their doors, see if they can use their restroom, letting their animals out, people running out of gas. There's been a lot of issues. I know they're staging extra sheriff deputies up that corridor on the other side above the Lewis River, and same with the state patrol in case there's any emergency calls that need to go up the highway. They won't have to fight through traffic. So I know it's a 40-some day project. We're only in day
11 or
8?
12.
Yeah, 10, 12. So there's quite a few days left. I hope there's a great incentive program in that contract for them to finish early, because we have schools starting in that area August 28th.
Mhm.
And so, bus traffic through Green Mountain Road is going to be a challenge here in 3 weeks.
And they're just downtown.
Would all
Woodland.
go away if the state would just link Cloverdale to Dyke Road. Simple.
Yeah, which ties into, you had mentioned you're pursuing, trying to get this event and exposure in higher legislatures.
Yes, we're also working, we have our traffic counters out right now on Cloverdale. So we're going to then do it periodically through the construction and then do it again after construction so that we can show, this is what we had during construction. This is what our normal traffic is on this route. And this is a typical, if there's an accident, everybody goes, "Ooh, I'm getting off on Green Mountain and going around."
You're also typically in contact with our lobbyists from CFM.
Oh, yes, I can give them that information.
Yeah, I would make sure that they see that.
And I know, I've spoken to other people who are talking about if they're going to Portland, they've been taking Highway 30, and Highway 30 had an unfortunate week last week with a number of accidents and
Several, yeah.
fatalities over there, so.
And there's still additional traffic going south on I-5 because Highway 12's been shut down for the same amount of time for the fire activity in the Rimrock Lake area. So it's been shut down from Natchez to White Pass.
Hmm.
Would it be worthwhile to provide some resources for lobbying legislature? Because it's a state solution, really.
It
We
might be.
we don't pay for lobbyists to represent us up in Olympia. Normally, I know you did a couple years ago, I think.
Mhm.
We had somebody work for us. I think with this construction, it really highlights and might give us the kind of leverage we need to just make that connection. There should be a frontage road connection.
And the follow-up to that now, that was just one part of the bridge. When do we do the other part?
So this total project, they're doing one side of the bridge and then they're doing the other side of the bridge.
That's the 2
That's
months.
the 2-month timeframe. The other thing of note is they are in design for the other bridge over the Lewis River and the area with a 2026, I believe, construction. So
Then it'll be Clark County's problem.
it will be in Clark County, but it'll still be impacting us all the way up.
Oh, yeah, yeah. That's the one thing that just seems to me so obvious that in terms of prioritizing things, I-5, exit 21, exit 22 is not a Woodland problem. It's a state problem. And the Lewis and Clark Bridge is not a Cowlitz County problem. It's a state problem.
Yes.
Actually, it's probably including some of the nation problem too. A lot of commerce that goes through there.
A lot of commerce. If you look at the pictures of just the number of trucks, if you get on WashDOT's cameras, you can see the trucks just sitting there waiting to get through.
Yeah.
Well, I have a feeling there's probably more money available currently than there will be in 2 or 3 years. Sure.
Yes.
Unfortunately, they don't have the planning for the alternate way, so.
I think what's happened with the posting the locals only and all that has worked pretty well, and any solution like that, I'm really okay with. How do we, what are our requirements? Like, can I go post a locals only traffic on my street?
So local traffic only is generally a sign that is posted when you're doing a construction project and you've got a section of the road closed down. So local traffic only is generally posted when you are trying to get where there's a detour because you cannot get all the way through, is generally when local traffic only signs are posted. The weight restriction signs, we can put those up by code if it's going to cause damage to the road, which
You
is.
don't need a hearing and all kinds of stuff.
No, the local traffic only road closed are generally either the public works director, the county engineer can say these conditions exist. And so like when we did Slide Creek, that construction project, we just had to post it in the paper a minimum of 2 weeks before the project started and say that we're closing it for this reason, for this duration, and reopen it.
I'm just smiling because I picture bureaucracy will end us, but I can picture a huge sinkhole, but you can't put a sign up there yet, and people have to drive off a cliff.
The emergency we can do immediately.
Okay, good.
That's right, you do have a sinkhole in your district, don't you?
I-
Minor
yeah,
Road in
I-
Kelso?
I'm trying to figure out how to move that into Rick Dahl's district.
He's not here, he can't defend himself.
So if you want to switch to that topic, Minor Road in Kelso, I've been meeting with Kelso. We have come to an agreement on a plan to repair it. They were going to present it to WashDOT and they are planning on doing the repair Wednesday night to the storm drain that's damaged and getting the road fully back open. And then we will be in discussions on whose problem it is,
Yeah.
who's going to pick up the bill.
So it'll be done by Thursday morning, people will be able to.
That is the hope. They may have to do a second night, but they're going to close down do the work at night because they're going to have to go all the way across the road to fix it.
Are there any unknowns? Is there damage that could be hidden?
Maybe, we may go across, or we may go across the road and find other things that have not been located for decades.
If I remember correctly, Mike, didn't we have a problem with unknowns in Kelso, under Kelso streets when we first put that pipeline through?
Yes.
Was it the
Yes.
same location or was it a little bit farther down?
So
closer to Allen Street.
it was a little further down. So the Kelso pipe was mislocated and that was hit 10 years ago when we did this project. And so that was repaired at the time.
10 years ago?
10 years ago.
Oh my
It has
gosh.
been that long. So 10 years ago, when they were boring that line, they bored through the Kelso's line because it was mislocated by like 10 feet. So the alignment was, we hit it. Kelso fixed it. We put the line, finished putting the line in and everybody went on the merry way. So this time, the sinkhole developed. You weren't here last week. That's why you missed
Oh, I
this. So there was a lateral coming from I-5 that was not located neither when we did the project or when Kelso called for emergency locates. So when we were putting the line in, the leachate line bore through this drainage line that's never been located.
Hmm.
And so it took 10 years for enough stormwater to get into the sawdust fill out there to cause it to break down and create this sinkhole. So that's why there's going to be discussions on who's responsible at the end.
Hall of Justice all over again? The sawdust
Sawdust,
yeah.
deteriorating. My goodness. Okay, thank you.
Are we good?
Mm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're a little ahead of schedule, but I think there was a call to advance things. I see our prosecuting attorney is here. Let me see, do you have any miscellaneous you wish to bring out at this time?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Is there any reason we shouldn't go straight to the HR portion?
No.
Good morning, Jessica Warren, Human Resources. I have 3 executive sessions this morning. 5 minutes each. The first is qualifications of an applicant. The second would be collective bargaining, and the third, performance of a public employee.
Ooh. Performance. Bargain
Qualifications.
and qualifications. That's about all of them, isn't it? Are you sure there isn't one more we can do?
There might be. Those are my 3 big ones.
National security. I think.
There we go.
5 each.
Mhm.
I like Monday optimism.
Yep.
So let's go ahead, recess into executive session for 5 + 5 + 5 for qualification, bargaining, and performance.
I did it
We
so
will do it
well.
again with apologies.
I'm requesting a motion to authorize the chairman to sign a proposed separation agreement with an employee with content as substantially presented to the board.
And I so move. Or is it me so move? I can't remember that.
We, we have a motion on the floor to approve the recommendation that the chairman, in this case, that would be I, to sign a separation agreement. Are there any questions or additional discussion? I see none, so I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
I also vote aye. The motion does pass.
And it simply relates to some reorganization and downsizing in staff because of that.
Okay, and do we have anything else?
That's all I have.
Do we have a miscellaneous?
Not for me. Otherwise, other than it's nice to be back. It's not fun being sick.
It is so unusual this year in so many ways. The weather has been different.
Yeah.
A lot of dynamics have been different. The construction on I-5 has been horrible.
Oh, no. Yeah.
So we have no meeting on Wednesday, right? Correct. There'll be no meeting on Wednesday. There'll be the regular Tuesday meeting tomorrow. It will be rather short meeting, so for the public, they should use that as an opportunity to come and talk to us about anything and everything. And for those few of us who are on Zoom today, let's not forget tomorrow is the last day you can cast your your vote for the primary. And by about 8:15, you should be able to get a pretty good view of where things stand. And every day thereafter, for 2 days or so, you'll get an update. Dennis, is there anything else you'd like to say?
Nope, I think,
I always like taking advantage of people who know stuff. It's just in my nature. Tell us a little bit about, the turnout has been dismal. Do you recall a time when turnout was just so absolutely dismal as to require some explanation?
yeah, it is surprising to have a primary election in a presidential election year be low. Normally they are lower, and of course, presidential candidates are not on the ballot. So it's sort of an afterthought type of an election. Plus, it's the problem we always have with primary elections in August. It's vacation and the weather's been good. So I'm not too surprised that the numbers are down. The other thing that's kind of interesting is that as you look at primary ballot, there are enormous lists of candidates running for office, not necessarily at the local level, because those are all manageable, but having 13 to 20 candidates running for governor, almost as many running for US senator. I mean, there's a certain absurdity to those numbers that is kind of discouraging. People say, oh, I'm not going to put that much time into it. So I hope that's not an increasing trend, but we certainly have seen it happen, particularly since we've had mail-in ballots. And I don't know if there's a relationship between having mail-in ballots and having these huge numbers of people filing for state offices in particular, but
I have to admit, I'm a bit apprehensive because I cannot come up with a scenario that says this is a good thing. Are people just so frustrated? Are they just?
well, I can offer an opinion, and that is, it to me, there has been a significant decline in an independent free press, which it seems like the media outlets are biased one side or the other. And so it's tough for people who don't spend a lot of time engaged in civic issues to keep abreast of all the different subtleties that are going on. We've had court rulings by Supreme Courts that have basically said government should not take it upon itself to determine what is true. And then I think I agree with that, absolutely.
Yeah.
But from the very beginnings of this republic, we've always had a vigorous press. As you know, you could almost say an independent press is the fourth branch of government, because it's the only agency that we have with the power to rein in government when it goes amok. Although in the early years, the press, the printed press was very partisan. I mean, the Federalists had their newspapers, and the then Republicans had their newspapers. The then Republicans are now the Democrats, but so right now, the media bias is, I mean, they don't, it's so blatant that they don't even recognize that they're being biased, and that's both sides. So it is a little frustrating for the future of democracy, because there's there's challenges on both sides, getting the message across. And I don't know what the answer to that is, because I don't see the printed press becoming any more effective, because people are relying on electronic media to get their information. So
There's, back when compulsory education laws came about, it was pretty clear that people prized what I would call functional education. If you could do something, you were praised for it. And we've lost that in many ways, it seems. Earlier, maybe 50 years ago, we kind of praised the student. And now we really don't praise the students, we praise the athletes. And students seem to have no of course, I'm speaking in great generalities. Ignorance doesn't seem to be anything that bothers anybody. And you can't make good decisions if you're ignorant. And it does remind me so much of the fall of the Roman Empire, where everything was based on the games and everything was debased. It used to be that people would discuss whether the ends justify the means. And I haven't heard that discussion in a very long time, but it seems evident that people think the ends will justify any means.
I would respectfully suggest that history perhaps has a different way of guiding. We can look back 50 years ago, almost to the day. The President of the United States resigned from office, the only president to have done so, after a deliberate cover-up of misdeeds by his re-election campaign, that it took the collaboration, if not cooperation, of both the legislative and judicial branches to bring about that change in office. To me, that was much more destructive to our governing process. That was much more destructive to the governing process than what we're going through now. And we go through impeachment processes now, depending on partisanship. And, both sides go after each other with impeachment, which is a total misuse of that very powerful tool. So I think times have been much worse. The divisions in this country were much, much worse. Threats from foreign terrorists, I think, are more serious now, obviously. But
if I could interrupt
divisions
you,
are very severe.
a clarification, you're saying 50 years ago that you're talking about Richard Nixon, and your claim is that was destructive to our nation. I don't know.
And
that I've heard that.
and we made it through. And that's the other thing. I mean, we made it through. So the current talk about this is the election that's going to save democracy. Not so much. The process was much more of a threat to our democracy.
If anything, though, I would say people misuse democracy. The only thing democratic is the election of our representatives. The rest of it should comply with the rules of the republic. And each state seems to be a republic of its own.
Well, I did notice, and the minutes from last week's meeting, you had made a comment about the Pledge of Allegiance, utilizing the word republic rather than democracy.
Right.
Because democracies historically have never survived.
Right.
Well, until the approval of the 1787 document we revere as our Constitution, republics had failed to survive. They all, every individual republic that had been tried had collapsed into either tyranny or mob violence or foreign invasion. And the elaborate division of governmental powers concocted by James Madison, most of which were adopted into the Constitution, not all, but most, created a very limited form of republicanism. That is, government powers at the national level were divided between states and a federal government. And within the federal government, power was divided between three independent branches: the legislative, executive, and judicial branch. And so far it's survived. I think the very crass partisanship shown by the president's attempt to reform the federal judiciary would destroy the independent judiciary. That's the biggest threat to our style of government. Heaven forbid that the president gets his way, because we would lose an independent judiciary. So.
Yeah, you're spot on all those. Our Constitution was supposed to address some of the foibles of humanity. We love power, we love to control things, and that was intended to make sure we weren't too successful at it. But unfortunately, was Robert Bork said in an interview after he was not confirmed for the Supreme Court, that he thought the majority of the Supreme Court decisions in the last 100 years were illegitimate. And he did volunteer that he preferred the earlier decisions over the more recent ones, but they nevertheless were illegitimate. Anyhow, thank you for this discussion.
You're welcome.
Don't see any hands up, and I think that means we've exhausted our time. Are we good to close?
All right.
We are closed, done, completed. What's the right term?
Adjourned.
Adjourned, thank you.